Are you ready to get your health back but feel overwhelmed by the endless healthcare options? We believe God has called each of us to a specific assignment, and we want to make sure your body, mind, and heart are up for the task. It's time to simplify the process of healing. At Cornerstone Integrative Healing, we offer simple, effective, easy ways to prioritize your health and gain understanding. No prescription pad needed. I'm Kari, a pharmacist turned integrative health practitioner. I'm so excited to have these conversations around topics with my friend, Jenn.
Hi there, I'm Jenn, and together with our team at Cornerstone Integrative Healing, we offer an alternative to traditional healthcare, combining our expertise and experience in the medical field with our knowledge and faith to break the cycles of guessing what's wrong. We know the road to healing, feeling good again, can be overwhelming. You can expect honest conversations around the ups and downs of healing. The truth is, there are so many layers to healing. Because we've taken the time to learn where true healing comes from, we've learned how to help other women discover a different way of caring for themselves. Join us every week for new episodes as we discuss topics that are personal and pertinent to your healing journey. Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. I'm here with my co-host Kari, and we have our special guest with us, Marina Chalk, our other pharmacist, to have a really great discussion following in our series here on just the pros and cons of different most commonly used drugs. And today we're talking about SSRIs, which I'm really excited about. This is, I think, a really good conversation to have. I think it's a hard conversation to have. I know a lot of people feel reliant on them. And so I know we've said this before, but I want to say it again. This is not an anti-drug podcast. This is not a shaming podcast. We really are we're trying to give you guys as much information as possible just to make informed decisions. And so we hope you know where our heart is with that. Today we just want to talk about some of the more popular SSRIs and, just some background on SSRIs. I know for myself, something that was really key for my understanding of SSRIs was reading a book called A Mind of Your Own by Dr. Kelly Brogan. She's an MD. She worked a lot in, working with pregnant women with, depression. She worked harder after she came off conventional medicine. So she was conventionally trained. She went to MIT. I think she went to Cornell too. I mean, she's a smart cookie, right? She kind of flipped camps and came into integrative care. But anyway, did a lot of work of weaning people off SSRIs in her experience. But anyway, I learned a lot about just the data on SSRIs. And one of the biggest things that she mentions in that book is the data is really skewed on the effectiveness of SSRIs, which was really eye-opening for me. And she said, long-term use can sometimes lead to chronic or even treatment-resistant depression. So for me, and if you look at a lot of our patients and, when I was in the industry working with other doctors, a lot of their patients, probably more than half, were on some sort of SSRI. So it's just eye-opening, right? Marina was just saying, a lot, we're doing this, and Marina, maybe you want to just say what you said about, the idea of drugs and, what's the end game?
Mm-hmm. I might have alluded this to one of our other podcast episodes, but in my retail experience as a pharmacist where, I am dealing with hundreds of people on a daily basis, I see their medication profiles, and generally they stay with a pharmacy for years, so I can kind of see trends of drug use. I have never seen anyone come off of these medications, SSRIs, PPIs, statins. It's something that there's no healing being done here. unfortunately. There's a masking of sorts, and possibly, if they were to need, it's always like, let's increase the dose, or let's add on an adjuvant medication of similar class to help you kind of get over the next hump. There's never, well, when am I tapering off of these? That's not a question in the conventional medicine world. And I see it play out in the retail world, in reality. So I would just really like people to ask themselves what is the goal here, with any medication, not just SSRIs, but with any medication. So.
And SSRIs, maybe you do need it short term, right? Maybe there's been a death or a divorce or something that's really hard, and you do need a little bit to take, quote unquote, the edge off. And again, but the point is, hopefully you can taper off at when you're in a better place to sort of process those events. I think sometimes I was talking to a gal, she was from South Africa, and she opened up an integrative clinic here in the States, and she was like, "Why are you Americans so afraid of big emotions?" And I just started laughing. I couldn't help myself, but it's the truth. Like we just, you know, are afraid of processing big things sometimes, or it is hard, right? Like it's really hard to process those big things. And if you can't, that's okay. Like that's perfectly okay. Again, no judgment, but we want to talk just a little bit about, and maybe you guys can talk about the specific, a couple of the specific SSRIs drugs, so you know what we're talking about when we're talking about an SSRI, which is by the way, SSRI stands for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor.
Yeah, sure. So, as I've done in the other ones, I want to make sure this is not medical advice. That's very important to us. And these drugs are something that need to be really handled with a lot of care if you've been on them. And there's a specific way you can't just stop these medications ever. That's very dangerous, honestly. So do not hear us say stop if you are on one, please.
No,
Okay.
yes.
So, SSRIs, as Jen mentioned, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Here are some of the common ones, if you recognize them by these names: fluoxetine or Prozac, sertraline or Zoloft, escitalopram or Lexapro, citalopram or Celexa, and then paroxetine or Paxil is another one. And so the way that these work is they really alter your brain chemistry in a way. Your brain cells talk to each other by using chemical messengers, and one of those is serotonin. And so typically after serotonin sends that message, your brain reabsorbs it pretty quickly. But these drugs help serotonin stay around a little bit longer, so that you can get the benefits of serotonin a little bit longer. So these drugs are typically given to help with just, in a crisis, or creating kind of breathing room for your mind, emotions, your body, symptom reduction, anxiety, depression, those types of things. And I know a lot of people, are on these medications. So that's kind of, we want you to hear us say that we understand that there's always a reason, right? It's just a bigger conversation that we kind of just wanted you to have more information on, other options, and also what these drugs are doing in your body, right?
Yeah. Dr. Brogan talks a lot about sometimes when you do start an SSRI, because the data wasn't super strong for the drug itself, they think that maybe, and she sort of theorized this, was that the brain actually is trying to adapt to the biochemical change. And so the brain trying to overcome or adapt to the drug is what creates the change, right? And that's sometimes also why she mentioned, you kind of get used to a certain dose, and so it needs to go higher and then higher and then higher.
Yeah.
Because the brain is trying to compensate for that chemistry change. But that's where you're getting some of the symptom reduction, is what Dr. Brogan talked about, which I thought was super interesting, because again, we always talk about how the body is so innately intelligent.
It really is. Yeah. So true.
I think it's important to mention, like Kari mentioned, it is like our happy chemical, so to say. but it regulates way more than just mood. It regulates our digestion and our sleep and our sexual function. So if we're altering some of these things, you can kind of see where that could lead to maybe issues down the line, because it does alter more than just the brain. So it can affect other parts of the body because of where serotonin is made. And it's made, 95% of it is made in our gut. So you can imagine, it could alter that chemistry as well, our gut microbiomes. And I didn't actually know this, but serotonin is made from tryptophan, which is an essential amino acid, meaning that we cannot produce tryptophan in our bodies. It has to come from our diet. So I just thought, well, that's interesting as well. If someone feels like they don't, quote unquote, don't have enough serotonin, maybe there's a diet factor at play there too.
Yeah.
Well, it just makes you think how connected, and it's like we hear this, but how connected the gut is to the brain, right? And so yes, what you're eating, but also how are you digesting it? It's like a whole, that could be a whole podcast in itself. But the gut brain connection is absolutely huge.
Mm-hmm.
So that would make sense why, one of the main side effects could be GI symptoms, because you're kind of altering that, and that connection's really strong.
Yeah, amino acids are absolutely key. If you are feeling any anxiety or depression, I would say your number one change would be to increase protein and make sure you're breaking it down with something like enzymes or hydrochloric acid. That is first and foremost, and then getting your first morning light, because that exposure to red and infrared first thing in the morning, ideally within an hour of hour of sunrise, is what is telling that spectrum of light, is telling the body or to make those neurotransmitters, right? That light actually interacts with those amino acids in the eyes. And I just wanted to say something super interesting is, I don't know if a lot of you know this, but there's I was reading some historical perspective, and that right before Prozac was released, there was a huge assault on L-tryptophan supplements, meaning they banned them. I think.
Wow.
Right.
Oh, man.
Oh, it's juicy. It's juicy.
And I want to thank you, Jenn, for bringing up the sunlight and the protein. And just like my honest personal experience with going through anxiety, depression, going through our fertility journey, the moment that changed was when I started going outside more and increasing my protein. No joke. Aside from, finally allowing God into my life, but the more physical things I was doing was increasing protein and going outside every single morning, going outside when I could during the day. That is when the needle moved for me. So this is not just, hearsay. This is like my own personal experience on this.
And for me, it was minerals. When I increased my minerals, my anxiety changed drastically when I started using Relight. So those are two real cases. And I did a ton of stuff for anxiety, like alpha stim, brain scans, like you name it. So these are two real, examples of simple lifestyle hacks that really do make a difference, and where you should be starting. But the other thing I wanted to say about depression, and again, it was from this book, and if you haven't gotten this book, if you have a history of depression, you need to read it. But Dr. Rogan talks about the inflammatory piece of depression, and that basically higher levels of inflammatory markers, usually from the immune system, because the body is on high alert, significantly increases your risk of depression. And so, if you've had a history, or maybe you even haven't, we all carry subchronic underlying immune burdens. But this is a good point. She mentions people with Hep C, they actually use a drug that's pro-inflammatory called interferon. And people who start taking the interferon have a 45% increased percentage of developing major depression.
Oh, wow.
So that inflammatory piece is such a huge piece for depression. Those cytokines are, those inflammatory messengers trying to tell the body to heal, are extremely important when you're dealing with anxiety and depression.
And can we maybe mention if someone wanted to test for inflammation in their body, what kind of markers they can ask for from their doctor?
Sure. SAD rate would be one, C-reactive protein, homocysteine. Those are just a couple off the top of my head quickly. Um, there's other ways you can obviously look at inflammation too by reading blood work, but those are just
Yeah.
yeah.
Those are some good ones for sure. So we already mentioned, just some of the side effects of these medications. One that sticks out to me is just the emotional suppression, like just not being able to truly connect with people or not being able to really feel your emotions. And we've talked about how important that is in other podcasts. So we're not going to go super deep into that, but yeah, it's just a big thing, right? That's how we grow emotionally. That's how we, just experience joy. That there's just a lot to that you're sort of missing out on whenever you have that emotional suppression that usually comes with these medications.
Yeah, when you're
This
suppressing all the bad stuff, you're suppressing the good
all the
emotions
good
like
yep.
joy too. And I know one of the major side effects of an SSRI is low libido,
Mhm.
which is such a bummer because, obviously that can be, it's not the joy, but it's definitely a joyous part of life, right? And with
Yeah,
low
God made
libido,
that.
yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Um,
And it was, I think it was a UK study found that 40 to 60% of users of SSRIs experience some sort of like emotional dulling, which is what we're talking about.
Mhm.
So that kind of dulled, numbed, or blocked feeling, that's a huge percentage of people that
Yeah,
experience this. And
which is the
it's
point, right? Like if you're
right.
taking it short term, like, and I get, that makes sense.
yeah, it's really the long term. And all of these things that we're talking about, it's pretty much staying on them long term. But
Mhm,
yeah,
mhm. Yeah, we're meant to experience both positive and negative emotions, just as Jen said at the beginning of the podcast. It serves as like a crucial survival mentality. It serves like growth and resiliency and change, problem-solving mechanisms. All those emotions, both positive and negative, play into those things. So if we're
yeah,
kind of dulling those after so many years, we're not experiencing those growth patterns the way we should be, and keeping our brain fresh and renewed, especially getting older when those things kind of
yeah,
start turning down.
right.
You want to feel both of those emotions so you can keep being fresh, keep being renewed, and keep growing, to keep your mind fresh. Um,
And I also want to talk about they use a term called Paleolithic deficit, which basically means, back in the Paleolithic times, obviously we were connected with the earth. We were outside the majority of the time. And this, Miranda, when it triggered in my head when you said being renewed, like we are literally renewed by the earth, by the sun, by nature, by being outside. And because now they coined the term Paleolithic deficit, which basically just means we live indoors and
Mhm.
are not connected to the earth or to our food supply anymore. That plays a massive piece, believe it or not, into how, our then selves are expressed, either anxious or depressed because of that. And then you add in the SAD diet, the standard American diet, synthetic folic acid, all those other things, which obviously I've seen cases where, they were literally in mental health hospitals. And this is a story. Actually, I think it was in that book also. I don't remember if it was B6 or B12. It was an older lady who was having psychiatric breaks. They basically gave her one nutrient. It was a single nutrient, like B12 or something. And she had massive recovery and never relapsed as long as she was on that nutrient. So, again, it's just little things that before we skip to a
Yeah,
medication, that
yeah,
should be looked at. Um,
for sure. And, like I said in the last episode, if you can give yourself some of these changes, just, even a month or two, if not, 4 to 6 months, I think you'll see massive shifts, even in just going outside every morning, eating more protein, adding in some electrolytes or salt to your water or salting your food more. Like, I know that you hear those a lot, but I promise they work. You hear them a lot because they work.
even and I want to say something, like, I know there's cases of massive depression, right, that need to be
Yeah.
treated. These even you can still do these lifestyle changes even if you're doing treatment,
Yeah.
and should be doing them.
Right.
They become even more important, um, in those cases, right?
Yeah, for sure. Brennan, before we hop off of some of the side effects, did you want to talk about weight gain? I know that you had mentioned that earlier.
Oh, yeah, since, um, it's a delicate balance, right? When we decrease our serotonin or increase our serotonin, there's always gonna be a downstream effect. And what one of those effects is it kind of decreases our dopamine. So our dopamine is like our reward center. It's our motivation. It's where our drive comes from. And so we can experience like joy and awe when we do a good deed or when we get a good grade or whatever it is. That all comes in that center of the brain. So decreasing the dopamine actually leads to decreasing energy expenditure. So when you're decreasing energy expenditure, you're gonna probably put on weight. So that's one of the mechanisms in which, there's this inverse relationship between serotonin and dopamine. And it can increase carb cravings. So you're going to naturally just go for the foods that, do cause more weight gain. So that's something else to just kind of be aware of that in my personal life, people that were on SSRIs had no idea that was a side effect and they were struggling with it. And they thought they were doing everything, they must be doing something wrong, right, to cause that. But actually, it's a brain chemistry thing that's caused by the medication. So it's just another important thing to keep in mind.
For sure.
And I also, as we're wrapping up and talking about, some of the side effects, I also wanna jump back really quick to the gut. I know we mentioned gut-brain axis, which, I mean, we could have 14 podcasts on the gut-brain
Yeah.
axis, right? And probably should. Um, but there was a study done where they took anxious mice and they put them on top of the cage, and then they put just, I guess, regular mice who didn't show any anxious tendencies, inside the cage. This is a little bit gross, but basically, as the anxious mice were defecating and the regular mice were eating it, they became anxious
Wow.
because they were influencing their microbiome or their gut microbes. So the gut is really, really,
Mhm.
really, really important.
Yeah, no doubt. And that kind of leads good into the next little pieces as we do wrap up. What's missing from the conversation of, you have some of these things going on. What are some other things that you could consider? We've already mentioned a few, right? Lack of sunshine, maybe not eating enough protein, minerals play a huge part. Gut, how is your digestion? How is your gut microbiome in general? Um, inflammation and we kind of mentioned immune, as well, activation. That's definitely something to consider. If you've maybe looked into all these other things. And the nervous system plays a huge role in this, of course. It affects a lot of the things that I just mentioned. There's definitely, trauma, big T, little t trauma that is probably playing into this at some level as well. And there's other things that are influencing the body, such as toxins, mold, environmental toxins, and of course, other medications as well. And there's rarely just one medication that people are on. So is worth mentioning. And, overall, on top of those things, there are other herbs that will help this, right? We were just talking about this with Jen. You have to tell them a little story about
Yeah, for
St.
sure.
John's wort.
For sure. So, I know someone that worked for a pharmaceutical company in Europe, and they were introducing an antidepressive drug in Europe. and having a really hard time. And what they found basically in the market research was that St. John's wort outsold any antidepressant 6-1 in Europe, obviously because of its effectiveness. And what's really interesting is, to me, is St. John's wort, they don't even think increases serotonin, right? It does other things, increases BDNF, which is brain-derived neural traffic factor, other things to help the brain, decrease inflammation. There's many things, and I don't want to get into it because it's not for the context of this, but there are, St. John's wort can be a really effective first starting point, as well as saffron. Saffron has amazing studies, as well as some other herbs. I know there's a combination of those herbs we actually use in practice called Nevaton, which we just see really great results with. So maybe along with those lifestyle factors, that could be a really good starting point. But I just want to caution, if you are on other drugs, specifically in anti-rejection drugs, or maybe a seizure med where the titers of those drugs have to be kept at a very certain level, that St. John's wort might be prohibited, because it does help with detoxing those drugs a bit. So those are the only concern before maybe checking with your doctor before you start those.
For sure. Check with your doctor before you start anything.
Right? For sure.
There's a great disclaimer.
For sure.
But yeah, and Marina and I were kind of laughing because in pharmacy school they told us just to stay away from St. John's wort at all costs, pretty much. And so yeah.
Well, I think that's again a bigger conversation too. Is a lot of these herbs here in the U.S. are adulterated, right? They're not regulated.
I mean, that's true too. Yeah, there's a lot more nuance to the conversation.
Right. And we use a lot of MediHerb, which is under pharmaceutical GMP in Australia. So they do and say what they do. So just make sure you're getting a really good quality herb. Gaia is a pretty decent one that's actually done here in the States. That's decent too. So but in general, if you do have a good one, a good supply or a good quality, it doesn't have to be avoided.
Right.
And going back to kind of like the factors that might lead to depression and anxiety, we are at a point in time where we are inundated with so much information, and a lot of it's negative information, whether it be the news or being so exposed to other people's lives, that we have to build up bigger resiliency in order to handle our emotions, right? So we're constantly, that balance of negative to positive is constantly being tested on a daily basis, on a minute basis for some of us. So I really strongly believe in like real connection with others, whether that be your family or your friends, in-person connection, calling people on the phone. I think the lack of that real communication has contributed to a lot of the dis-ease process that we're talking about. It prevents us from releasing these emotions to another human being and feeling that energetic connection. And it keeps them stored inside. And when I'm sure these girls have talked about on other podcasts how stored negative emotions inside cause physical illness. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind and to really look at your life and how you're spending your time and who you're spending it with, and how much time you're on your phone or taking in negative news. So that's another thing that I just thought was
I
really
love that,
important.
100%.
Good point. Well said.
Yeah.
So with that, that's a mic drop moment.
Definitely. Yeah, we hope we've given you like a good rounded approach to, looking at different factors and just giving you information to think about. Again, if you ever have any questions, we're always here, willing to answer those. And we just hope you're liking this series. We will see you on the next episode. Thanks for joining.
If this episode has served you in any way, drop a review wherever you listen to podcasts. We'd love it if you'd share any aha moments or takeaways on Instagram and tag us at Cornerstone Integrative Healing.
And if you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please do so. We want to continue to walk this journey with you. Until next time, friends, know that we are praying for you.